Hello. So recently I said I would create a scuff model as a goal. I decided why not make it into a challenge to increase the scuffness. So today I will be seeing if I can make a model in less than 4 hours. I had originally planned to do 8, but after sketching a little, in honesty I think it's too much time. I plan to split it into 2 hours for art and 2 hours for rigging. If I end up giving more time to one than the other, it's fine, as long as I stick to the 4 hours total. I wasn't planning to do it all in one sitting, so I took some breaks. First, I sketched up a rough idea. I didn't want to do anything too complex, as I know a lot of my time would be spent splitting the layers and rendering, so I went with a small chibi cat model. This first sketch took me around 8 minutes, maybe even less. It's just an initial idea. I was thinking if I had spare time, I could always add to it later. I had no toggles planned as they would definitely take up more time. Next up is the lining. I wanted to also keep the line work simple and also make it look cute, so I went with a thicker, more cartoony lining style. Although lining is normally the bane of my existence, it went relatively quick. Maybe spent less than 20 minutes on lining, but I also added in my flat colours here. Colouring was also pretty quick. I already filled in the basic shape, so I just needed to add her patterns. I also did end up colouring the liner, as I'm not a huge fan of black lines. With the shading, again I didn't do anything too complex, just a few little hints of shadow. By 47 minutes in, I had already got most of the basic stuff down. I was honestly quite surprised with how quick I managed to do it. I went back to see if there was anything I wanted to edit. I did end up changing the line art colour and editing a few bits, but nothing major. I decided I'd save that extra hour in case I needed it for more rigging or if I added more art later on. Next up was splitting the layers. I converted my file to a PSD and merged any layers that needed to be. I made sure everything was labelled correctly before putting her into Live 2D. This led to be around 55 minutes total time. Now to get into the rigging and bring the model to life. I first start off with the mouth and getting some meshes done. Although I have left and right for most parts of the model, a lot of it will just be copy and pasted to keep things symmetrical. Here is where I was working on the mouth forms, making sure they all look clean and work. I also did a cheek puff toggle. She doesn't have a complex mouth, only 9 forms. Cells are very quick to set up if the mesh is done well. For most of the stuff on this rig I used the auto mesh, but for a few details like the mouth and tail I did it manually. Eyes are my favourite thing to do, both in rig and art. The eyes I drew are very basic, so I didn't have to do too much. I added a bit of jiggle where I could to make it look more silly. Head angles can be pretty time consuming, but as she was just a silly chibi, I didn't do too much. Just made sure she had at least some angles. Next, I set up the angles onto the physics to make it more jiggly and added some angles to the ears. I may have missed recording making the ear tips move, but I did record setting them up in physics. I want to make the ears look super jiggly and bouncy. I also gave the whiskers some jiggle on the y-axes and set up their angles. I also set up the Z angles. I like to have both a tilt for the head and the entire model. Most of the basic stuff was done, and I just had to duplicate and reflect it all over to the other side. This took around 10 to 15 minutes. It takes a bit of time to make sure everything is moved onto the right parameters and reflected properly. Here I was doing a little bit of testing, just to make sure everything was tracking properly and there wasn't anything that needed editing. For the most part, she was done. I did do some tweaking. I attempted to add more tail physics, but didn't like how it looked. I also gave her body a bit more squish. I ended up having a little bit of extra time, so decided to make a very small toggle for the whiskers. The idea was to kind of have them jumping up, like in surprise or being alert. And after exporting and putting her into VTube Studio, she was done. She turned out a lot better than I expected. She's a little scuffed, but in all honesty, not that bad. She has some flaws, but I'd say pretty good for 4 hours of work. I was honestly quite surprised how long the rigging took in comparison to the art. This may just be due to the fact I have been drawing a lot longer than I have been rigging, and just haven't quite learned all the tricks yet. She was a lot of fun to make. I liked how squishy and bouncy she turned out. Thank you so much to everyone who watched until the end. If you would like to see more content from me, feel free to follow and like. If there's any videos you'd want to see, you can also comment. Also, if you haven't yet, check out my socials. They will be linked below. That's all for now. Bye bye.